Before we get started on this week's episode, I just wanted to do a huge shout out to Carl and Jed, who are my first two Patreons. I cannot say how much this means to me that you're willing to help sponsor this show and help give back to our community. And if you'd like to check out what we have on offer for our Patreons, you can visit the link in the show notes. Thank you so much.
Hi, I'm Peter, also known as Traveler on the SolForge Fusion Discord, and you're listening to the Soulbind podcast.
You're listening to Soulbind, a new podcast about the people who play the hybrid card game SolForge Fusion and their relationship with games. Now, I love this game, but I am very curious to find out what Peter loves about it too. So in the next 45 minutes, we'll explore how Peter and SolForge were first introduced, how this game has changed for him over time, and what his hopes and dreams are for the future of the world of Solus. Peter, thank you so much for joining me. I'm really been looking forward to this chat, and I'd like to welcome you, especially because you're our first guest on the show who's not based in North America. So very warm welcome to you.
Wow, I'm impressed. I thought you had somebody from Australia earlier.
Not yet, but I'm sure the Australians are wondering why they're not getting a feature, and it's something that I definitely plan on doing at some point. We play SolForge a lot, you and me. You come to some OzForge tournaments. You always do very well when you do come along, so feather in your cap there. You're the first guest, I believe, I could be wrong, from outside North America. So set the scene for me a little bit with where you're from and your history with gaming in general.
I'm from the center of Europe, from Germany to be specific. And I have been playing games like SolForge for quite a long time. Asymmetrical card games, whether it's competitive or cooperative, are really my thing. SolForge gets so many things right, as you said earlier in some other podcast episodes. It really holds a special place in my heart. I
think people are curious as well. Like what I've found when I've gone to other cities and other countries and things like that is trying to understand the culture as well. I remember there being a big board gaming culture in Germany in the area you're in, but I'd love for you to talk to that a little bit. You know, was gaming a part of your life growing up, or was it something that sort of developed as you were growing up?
Well, if you compare it to other European countries, especially the neighboring ones like the Netherlands or maybe England, the board game community is probably a bit smaller. Though, as of current, I'm close to Berlin, and that's like the capital, and there are several LGSs. There are probably more local gaming stores for card games, board games, you name it, than in the rest of Germany combined. And, well, I didn't grow up anywhere near Berlin, so it was always kind of a hassle actually playing with people outside my family. I had to drive 50 kilometers to get to Cologne. But it was worth it. What
was it that made you want to go for that drive? Because I've been in that situation before as well, where I've driven sometimes more than an hour to play games with people. And I'm always curious, you know, what makes people gamers, or what is it about? Is it physical play that really interests you, and playing in the flesh, in person, that really interests you as well?
Well, the game I remember going the longest trips for was the Yu-Gi-Oh! Trading card game. Right now, it's not one of my favorite collectible card games, but I've spent quite a long time with it during my childhood and teenage years. And at some point, my friend circle was no longer a challenge.
I get you.
Everybody knew the decks everybody else was playing, and it got a bit stalematey. So we had to settle for new frontiers, if you will. That's where I played my first locals. Won a few of them, lost many more, but it was fun.
So you really got a taste of competitive play then, I'm guessing?
Yes, I think that was my first taste of competitive play. Right now, I do play SolForge somewhat competitively every now and then. At least I play tournaments. But I play a lot of Magic the Gathering competitively. And I've also played some other games, but none of them for longer than a year.
What is it about SolForge then? Because I'm interested, maybe we can start to get to the point where you first meet SolForge and how is that relationship formed? Are you playing Magic at the time? Set the scene for me, and when you first hear about SolForge and how did that all happen?
So I first encountered SolForge as the original digital-only SolForge, because As I've stated before, I really like those kind of games. And when they attract a certain amount of people, I have to take a look at it, at least get to know the rules and then decide whether this is something for me or not. And I was hooked immediately. Then again, back when the original SolForge launched, and not many people know this, it was kind of an innovation. When people think of digital collectible card games, they think of things like Hearthstone. I think that's the biggest one. There also have been others, Hex, Shards of Fate. But I do believe SolForge, if you count for alphas, was the first game in that genre that was played competitively against other players and not just PvE.
So you were playing the original app, and I'm always interested to talk to people who played the original app because I didn't, and try and understand what I missed. So what did I miss not playing for those of us that didn't play the original app but are familiar with the current app? You know, what was it that was the big hook about that version? And it's different for different people, of course, so it's your own personal opinion.
There were some good things about it and some, well, unoptimized, let's say. It was a lot of fun building decks, especially the limited game mode. The economy of the game was very user-friendly. You didn't have to invest much to get playable decks or just have fun with the game, really. I personally didn't invest a lot because back then I was like 15 years old, I want to say, maybe 14. And I also played other trading card games at that time, so my budget was very limited. The game actually evolved quite a bit. While the player numbers seemed to decline, there were always new features. Eventually, they added a PvE campaign, a lot of different expansions. I don't even recall all of them. And the main thing was really games took quite a bit. They were slower than SolForge Fusion games right now. There were higher life totals. Games could become more swingy, as in you've lost board control for the entirety of the match, and then you just pull out some insane cycle 3 cards and establish board presence again, and you're back in it.
That's really interesting. It sounds fun. And you also said that, some of the other guests have talked about how like it was kind of a system that you could game in terms of like revenue and spending, which appealed to certain people when they didn't have a huge budget for it, because you could sort of play certain events or do certain things, and then you'd be able to sort of sustain without putting a lot of, coins into the system, if you will. Was that something about it that appealed to you at the time as well?
Oh, absolutely. And I am looking forward to what they are just now starting with in-game currencies.
Mm-hmm. Gold.
Yes, gold. And I'm absolutely fine just spending that on phantom decks, which I play in 1 or 2 events, if at all, and then have it be gone again. That's absolutely fine. And maybe it will bring in some other players if gold is easily to obtain.
Yeah, I'm fascinated. I'm fascinated to see how that goes as well. And yeah, this is very fresh. It just happened within the last 24 hours at the time of this recording. Might be a little bit later when this gets released, but we're all sort of responding to that news now as well. So tell me about what it was like when the game went away, because was it a big part of your gaming mix when the game shut down, or had you kind of stopped playing by the time the servers were switched off, the original SolForge?
I remember taking a long break from the game and coming back to it later. I only played a few hours on Steam, like something in the hundreds. When I returned, roughly 2 or 3 months later, support stopped, and eventually the game was shut down as well, which was a bit later. And in its current state, I believe you cannot even start the client properly.
That's interesting. So you'd taken a break and you'd walked away from a little bit, and then you were wanting to come back, but then the game wasn't there to play. And at the time, did you ever think it was going to come back again, or you thought that's it, like so many games, that its time has come and gone? And how did it feel then when SolForge Fusion came out? Were you one of the original backers for that?
I was not one of the original backers. I didn't really dabble into Kickstarter things. I haven't backed any Kickstarter yet. It's just not my thing. But I've kept a close eye on it to be one of the first people in Europe to play it. It made me sad, but eventually, I don't even know how I found out about SolForge Fusion. It was probably just some stroke of luck. I was probably looking at SolForge again,
pining for the love you'd lost.
Yes, and just wondering what Justin Gary is up to these days. think somebody in a Steam discussion talked about the future release of SolForge Fusion, and I was hooked immediately. I pre-ordered various products from a local gaming store in Frankfurt, maybe, who actually backed this, because very few game stores in Europe back the game, and even fewer are supporting it now with the release of the third set. So that was my only way to get my hands on some of these cards.
I'm interested too, because I think you fit an interesting type of gamer. I have a friend who's like this, so tell me if it kind of fits your bill. But when he's interested in the game, the first thing he'll do is he'll read the rules to decide whether he likes it or not. It's probably the last thing I do if I am making a decision if I want to play a game or not, reading the rule book. I like, it looks cool, looks interesting, the theme looks interesting. Then I had a completely different experience with SolForge, where I fell in love with the mechanics and the game system and everything first, and the rest came later. So where did you fit in terms of, that hook that you got with this game? Was it the rules and the mechanics and things like that first, and then other elements? Are you into the lore or any of those sort of elements of it, or not as much?
Well, the aesthetics of the first game were very pleasing. The way that every card had an individual artwork for each level, that was really cool. That played a big part. But yeah, I think rule sets are more important to me because something just fascinates me about the different ways you can create such a game. There are obscure Japanese card games which aren't played anywhere else in the world. But eventually I've had a look at the rule sets because I just want to see how far you can push things, and who knows, maybe I'll create a game someday on my own.
Yeah, a very noble aspiration. It shows that curiosity is a big part of your gaming experience as well. Curious, how does this work? How does these cards work, this card set as a whole, and sort of reverse engineering that to play something competitive. That's cool. What about, did you have a moment when you were playing the game where you felt like you were taking your gameplay to the next level? Some other people have talked about figuring out stealth or figuring out breakthrough, or just elements of the game that really clicked for them, and then could be about whether or not to chump block or things like that, or the power of playing on forge, off forge, something like that. Was there a moment in the game you can remember where you felt like you were taking your game to the next level? And it could be a tip that could be helpful for somebody who is still quite new to the game.
When I started to take chances, I can always calculate the odds of drawing a specific card because I know every card that's in my deck, that's cards that are not in my deck, and cards that can appear on the opponent's side of the field. So I feel like the most impactful plays I've made were at the end of the second turn of a cycle, when you can kind of estimate how the cycle can close out, and then just sometimes you have to take a 50-50. I either draw my out or I don't. And yeah, I think that made a big impact in how I play my games, how I win or lose my games. Most of my decks are not too optimized. They have very few removals. I should probably prioritize those more in my fuses. But yeah, it's a great feeling when I take a chance. I want that removal spell to show up, and it actually does.
And it does, yeah. I think if we're talking about the system of SolForge, the 5 cards out of 20 you don't see each cycle has to be one of my favorite components of it as well, just to create chance and probability and risk and things like that, and excitement, tension. I really like that aspect of the game as well, even though sometimes, it burns you when the card you needed ends up 3-4 cycles in that bottom 5 against the odds.
Yeah, I remember you having a bad time against me with your Rumble Spark deck because, well, it had exactly 2 key cards and none of them showed up.
That's it. It never happened again since, but one time it did, and I'll never forget it either. We'll definitely get into your opinions on Rumble Spark at some point. Don't worry. The founding member of the band RSE party. What do you think binds you to this game? So we've talked a little bit about your introduction to this game, but I always like to finish this first segment talking about what is the thing that really keeps you connected with this game or this community?
Well, the community is small, but it's a very good community. There's almost no toxicity or negativity here. Most of the events we host are bronze and entry level, which is pretty good. Yeah, and it being a small community also has its upsides. You know everybody on a first name basis. That's always fun when you see familiar faces. Yeah, it's definitely the community. And well, I do have hopes for the game. I have hopes to get other people to play with me, because this game is much easier to get into than things like Magic the Gathering. For example, it took me 3 years, I think, to teach my fiance the ins and outs of Magic the Gathering. And she's not on a competitive level right now, but she's holding her ground in various formats. With SolForge Fusion, the entry was much easier. We played like 4 games and she was pretty good at it.
That's great. And it's great to have a partner you can play games with. I'm blessed in that regard. My partner isn't really into games, but I'm always grateful to hear the opinions of people who can play games with their partner. I think that's a great way to bond. I realized, there's a section of your origin story we haven't gone over yet as well. And this is probably the section to do it. How did you get into owning or managing a board game store?
Well, it's a long story. At some point, I moved to Berlin. I moved in with my fiance. Back then, I wasn't really in a good place mentally. I had to keep myself busy. So eventually, I started to play Magic the Gathering in-person events again. I ditched that for 4 years because I was studying somewhere and just didn't have the time. But eventually, I started again. And I went drafting to another local game store where I met a community of people who told me about this board game cafe where they play Commander on every Sunday. It's a casual 4-player format. It's very popular. So eventually I got into that format as well and started to play there. And I met, I'm not kidding you, hundreds of amazing people I'm on a first name basis with. And I suddenly had more friends than ever before in my life. So eventually I was going to stick around. I got close with the owner of the store, who's now a good friend of mine. And eventually we decided I'm always hanging around here anyway, so might as well do something useful. So I started working a bit in service, helping out with logistics and stuff. And the more we progressed, the more tasks I started to take over. Eventually, it got to the point where we decided, okay, how about you get yourself some creative freedom and I manage these things at the store. We don't have to change a thing about ownership. That's all still your thing. But let me do the paperwork. Let me do the recruiting. Let me create those events. And then you have more creative freedom, because he was always sad because he wanted to expand. He wanted to start new projects, other stores, but didn't find the time. So eventually, that was a good way of making that possible. So yeah, I'm kind of managing a board game cafe right now. It's a pretty demanding task, as in you have to take care of a lot of different things, but with an awesome community that wants to help you, it's possible. For example, I don't have to organize every event by myself, because in various communities, there's always a community leader who creates these events and does the main part. So yeah, it's not an LGS like you might be used to, as in we don't want to sell you things. The only thing we want to sell you is a good time. You may bring your own snacks and drinks or order food. That's no issue at all. You just pay for the time you spend at the store, where you get to play one of 400 plus board games we have there, or partake in some events like magic drafts or social deduction games in big groups. So yeah, Brettspielplatz in Moabit, feel free to drop by.
And then it was so funny that we compared notes and we'd worked out that I had actually been to this game store before. It was before your time managing it, but I've been there and I can vouch for it as well. It's a terrific place. I felt very welcome as a tourist there to come in and play Keyforge that I was playing at the time. And I had a wonderful experience, met wonderful community members like you're talking about. And I think I've still got a promo from Keyforge that somebody gave me very kindly from that, and I've got that on my desk here, so as a nice memento from my evening there. So it's nice. I really agree with what you're doing and how you're setting up the store to be a place where people can have positive experiences and not overly trying to monetize it, but obviously it's still a business that needs to make money and find a way to do that. So I wish you all the luck with that venture. And yeah, that's such an interesting part of your story and your history. I'm glad we covered that as well. But let's move on to part 2, transformations. We can talk a little bit more about SolForge. All right, so this is the section where we talk about transformations, moments where the game flipped one way or the other for you. And can you think of a milestone that changed your perspective on the game? Maybe we talk about the birth of Rumble Spark, or maybe we talk about something else, because I know you feel very strongly about that. But we don't have to go there yet. We can save that for later. What's the first thing that comes to your mind where a moment where the game flipped or changed for you?
The game will always probably be changing due to how Stoneblade handles things. So far, they've explored an entirely new thing with every new set. First, they introduced the soul binds, and now with set 3, we have exalts that can store value with energy counters, so you can use your resources at a later point in time. And I'm positive that the 4th expansion will be just as much of an innovation to the game. When I was introduced to the power of Darkforge Drain, it has been around since alpha, but it was not on my radar until the moment I got stoned by some gold tier deck. There was a Mantis with upwards of 100 stat total. I was stunned.
Yeah,
I had to flip through my collection, eventually find a Darkforge Drain deck, just to realize it has 2 spells, none of which I want to play.
Oh, that's sad.
It's not my favorite strategy anyway, but the more you play this game, the more you will find things on like these that seem weak on the surface. Like, why would I want to use my Forgeborn ability to give a creature +4/+4? That seems pretty underwhelming. And the more you will play it, the more you will realize there are a lot of those things. Because recently by listening to the podcast of Ankh Gaming, I got the idea to make use of an energizing creature with the River of Souls. Oh yeah, as he mentioned.
Nice.
So you can basically have a Zimus in a sense. So I combined 2 decks and tried that out, and it was underwhelming because the decks had like 50% cards, which I never wanted to see, vanilla creatures without effects. But I will keep a lookout for this strategy now.
And isn't that one really fun part of this game, that like we can't net deck in the sense that we can't, see a list and then build that exact list and play that list, but we can get exposed like you were to Darkforge Drain or to this energizing River of Souls. And then you have that moment where you look back. It's kind of a fun moment of anticipation where you look through everything you've got and you go, I wonder if I have that, or if I could build that, or if I could build a variation on that. That's one thing I really enjoy about this game. And I guess where I'm at with my collection now, that sometimes I do see something cool and then I can find something hidden in my own collection that I didn't realize was there. Does that ever happen for you?
You're absolutely right about that. I've played trading card games since forever, and net decking has always been, killing the joy for me in some sense, because I hate it when I show up to a tournament, I see the first 3 cards my opponent plays, and I know the other 57. It kills the fun, because we have thousands of options to build these decks, and you just go for what is the strongest. People underestimate that there is a certain strength in your opponent not knowing what you're up to. So when I play tournaments like in Pauper, which is a Magic the Gathering format where you play with common cards only, the power level is much lower and you have a lot more options. I always try to come up with something that hasn't been seen before. Sometimes that's harder and sometimes it's easier. But Stoneblade trying to create this situation where every deck is unique, probably not every strategy, but every deck, is a good way to increase the replayability of this game.
Absolutely. And even like you have a double Lyria deck and I have a double Lyria deck, but they play very different from each other. So, it's quite rare people that can build a deck like that. You and me are 2 of the people that can build it, but yours operates different to mine. Probably yours operates better, but I haven't tested it as much as yours. So this is something that I find very exciting and fresh and interesting about the game. And I've also played other games where, like Star Wars Destiny, there were thousands of combinations of characters with the points that you could build up on your team. But you went to tournaments and events and you would just see half the players would be playing the same list because it was the most efficient. And I always thought that was a little bit sad. So I really like this system.
Also, I like the feeling of owning something unique.
Yeah, absolutely. Were you ever a KeyForge player? Did you ever get into that at all?
Not too much. I've had a look at the game mechanics and I decided that it probably wasn't for me. It was unique. I absolutely liked the concept. I liked watching other people play the game at the store, but I couldn't see myself playing it.
It gets into a lot of those locked board states that you were talking about. At least in my experience, it did, where the board was the board and there was nothing you could do to stop it if you didn't have the right card. And yeah, I went pretty hard in it at the time, but as soon as SolForge came along, I could clearly see it was better for me and what I wanted from the game.
I mean, it's not a bad game by any means.
No, I agree.
Richard Garfield is a great game designer. Most things he touches just turn to gold. I really wish the game would have stuck around longer. It's kind of seeing a comeback right now at the store.
That's interesting. Well, you've got good players in the store, so good players, good community members are going to help grow a game, and no matter where you are in the world. Let's talk about the state of the game right now. What are your thoughts on where we're at? Just to timestamp it for people that may be listening to this in the future. Set 3 has probably been out for about a month now, maybe a little bit longer if you count the previews. So how are you finding it right now, Peter?
Well, I'm always a person who worries too much about things that are outside of my power. And all in all, I think it's in a good state. Though there are obvious problems that have to be addressed in the future, like some cards. We are playing an Eternal format right now, nothing's rotating out, and banning cards doesn't make sense because you would kill entire decks. So we have to come up with solutions for cards that limit design choices for Stormblade Entertainment. Just the mere existence of the Mantis, for example, has to be considered when designing a new Forgeborn. They are skilled game designers and they will find a way around it. Those are just the things that worry me a bit. And all in all, the game is progressively getting better. The sealed environment is great. Sealed events are always fun. No, I've never seen anybody rage quit a sealed event because the deck was utterly unplayable. I just see people showing up every week more and more. So it's in a good state, I think.
Yeah, I'm really enjoying the sealed, and I don't think I've talked to anybody who's participated in a sealed that didn't enjoy themselves, even if they set themselves the challenge of, this is a terrible deck, but I am going to try and get as many wins as I can out of it. You know, setting yourself that own personal goal. Or I know other people who just, if they can't find something they really like, then they'll change their decks over the course of 3 rounds and walk away. And they've had 3 different experiences each game. There's just so much I think they've done right. Anything you particularly love about the state of the game right now? Or you talked about being interested in Ank's exploration of Energizing and River of Souls, but any other card combos or particular interactions that are really interesting you at this moment in time?
I don't mean to come off as a power gamer or something, but I think Necreum just gets more exciting with every expansion because it keeps breaking the rules of the game. Reanimating creatures becomes more popular with all the spirit synergies. And I believe if they aren't careful, we will see more infinite combos soon. Stitcher was heavily nerfed, and it is technically still possible to go off with that, but not as easy anymore. I really like the spirit synergies right now. I don't have a good deck for it yet. I have a good Necreum half, but it's missing a Yetera half, which is important for the Inspirited modifier. Yeah, I just don't have that yet, but there are still a few set 3 sealed events, so might get lucky.
Exactly. I feel like this is a good section to talk about Rumble Spark as well. So I know I've alluded to a little bit. I don't know how much you want to talk about it. We joke around because sometimes when you join events, you put your team name as Ban RSE. So talk a little bit about the Ban RSE party and how you founded this movement.
Well, as far as I'm concerned, there is no other person in this movement other than myself. It's more of a joke than anything else.
Yeah.
I believe every person who was involved in the creation of RSE has already admitted to mistakes were made and there's nothing we can do about it now. Even if you were to release entire archetypes that would, for example, in Magic we would call the stacks pieces, limit the amount of actions your opponent can take during their turn, as in, well, for example, if there was a creature that would say, you can only take 2 actions in a turn, you can only play 2 cards, that would already shut down a lot of Soulbind cards because, well, that's 2 cards. Even if you were to release such a heavy stacks piece, that wouldn't really fix the issue, right? Because then I would have to run this strategy to counter another strategy. And we're not constructing decks here. We are essentially playing, well, 2 sealed decks and combine them. So we just have to live with it. And I wouldn't ban the card by any means, because banning the card, that would just destroy a lot of decks people hold dear. I believe Kali's favorite deck was a Rumble Spark deck. I've had a look at it. It's absurdly powerful. It has like 6 or 7 spells. I don't know. Yeah. I don't want to face it ever.
No, it's silver, so you probably won't have to.
I do have a lot of silver decks. They are just not in the top 1%. They're in the top 20%, so they can absolutely stomp a bronze event, but they are not good enough to participate in a silver event. If we were more players, I could see there being different formats where you are prohibited from combining certain cards. Like Rumble Spark is cool, Dark Card is cool, just don't run them together.
Yeah.
Because I believe that wouldn't even kill a deck, because a Rumble Spark deck with the Betrayer Dark Card doesn't exist yet. If it did, we would probably know about it.
And there are other options. I've seen people, you've probably seen it as well. I don't know how many people have tried it using green and breakthrough as a way to proc it's a little bit more work for sure.
You can beat this strategy. It's not unbeatable. For example, my best deck, I want to call it, has 2 creatures that shut down abilities. So I might be able to either stop the Dark Card from triggering for a turn or shut down the reanimation of the Rumble Spark. Problem is, one of them is a Batter Height, and, well, Rumble Spark can be a level 3 creature that comes out in cycle 1. So what are you going to do?
Yeah, well, that's the crux of it, isn't it? Let's move on to the next round, next segment, because I feel like this is, starting to get into some really cool territory there. So, what is your favorite card in SolForge? Could be any set. Is there a particular one which means something to you?
Yes, there is. It's Lyria. Lyria and I go way back. Lyria was the first legendary I opened in the original SolForge. Back then, legendaries were a bit different. There were several runs in a set, and you can still see some of them in SolForge Fusion. It's usually the ones that have names like Lyria or Zimus or Cacklebones, which used to be named Doomwing, which I think is much cooler.
Much cooler.
She was the first legendary I opened, and obviously I had to play Necrium from then on. And funnily enough, in the first starter kit I opened for SolForge Fusion, there was the Betrayer Lyria that I play every now and then.
That's awesome. It's funny how often a Betrayer bonds somebody to a particular creature as well. And is there anything about her ability? Like some people talk about her in frustration, drawing her turn 1, but obviously you've gotten over that, or yes, you can see past that limitation.
Yeah. Lyria is hit or miss. 50% of the time, Lyria is not even a card. In turn 1, you don't want to see her. You don't want to see her in turn 4 because that's not a thing. So there's just this one window, and you have to set up Lyria. You have to keep small creatures in your discard pile, even when you want to upgrade them with something like a Necromancer or you want to play them. So that's always difficult. But there are ways to make her work. You can just not play her when you draw her in cycle 1 and then upgrade her with something like a Necromancer. Or, well, we are Necrium, so maybe you have an army commander later and you can get Lyria level 3 and then another creature of your choice. There are ways to make it work. It's much more consistent when you have 2 Lyrias in a deck, so the one you draw in the second turn can get back the one you drew in your first turn and didn't play. But I can absolutely see people not liking that card.
You have to work a little bit, but she's worth it if you can get over the hump. And a strategy I've really enjoyed as well is if you have enough upgrade synergy in both halves to very much control what are your possibilities of pulling back with what levels are in there. And that's a really fun mind game to try and figure out, okay, I've got it so that I know what she's going to pull. She kind of becomes Necromancer level 3 at that point if you can craft. And I've enjoyed that when I've played her. What about your most hated card? Maybe we've already covered it.
Well, there's nothing I can say about RSE that hasn't been said before, so I'm going to go with something more interesting. I've thought about this quite a bit, and don't get me wrong, the card is not broken. Nothing should be done about it. I just don't like playing against it. It's a Loyan Patroller. That's a stealth creature that is very aggressively statted, and while it's exalted, all opponents' creatures enter with stealth. So you can push through absurd amounts of damage if you just have one removal spell each turn, because it's just really hard to answer. On the other hand, it has 2 toughness on level 1, so it also dies to almost all damaging effects.
I haven't come across it yet, but it sounds powerful.
It is powerful, especially if you combine it with an aggressive Tempest deck, and you just go for a strategy. We don't interact with each other anytime. My creatures run through, it's a damage race, but I'm going to win because your creatures start off 1 turn later. They all come in with Defender. You're not going to attack me anytime soon. Yeah, I've lost games to a Loyan Patroller simply because creatures couldn't trade anymore.
Interesting.
But yeah, it's a good card. It shouldn't be removed. A Loyan deserves some good things too.
Yeah, I think we all feel like a Loyan needs some love, so maybe this is a set to do it. What about your favorite modifier? Something that you're never unhappy to see land on a forged creature?
This is difficult because there are a lot of great modifiers. I don't know if this one has been named before, but I really like Venerable.
No, you're the first.
Because Venerable does a lot of things. It seems like, it doesn't grant an effect. It just grants stats and not even a lot. But hear me out. SolForge Fusion is a game that's a lot about snowballing and moving your problems to a later date. So Venerable is good for that. And it becomes especially good if you get it on a creature that has a scaling ability. One of my favorite cards is my Venerable Necromancer. In Cycle 1, you get barely any downside for a really powerful effect. In Cycle 2, you get acceptable stats for a really powerful effect. And in Cycle 3, it's a 4/6, I believe. It doesn't matter. Even if it was a 1/1, it would still be really powerful.
No, I like the way you broke that down. And it's when you compare it to something like Ardent, it has so much more strength.
Ardent is great too.
Yeah, you like Ardent? Yeah?
Yes, absolutely. Ardent gets really strong stats on the 2nd cycle and pretty good ones on the 3rd cycle. It's a bit like Steadfast. I haven't quite figured out the difference yet.
No, I haven't either. What about your most hated modifier? So something that the instant you see it, you go, oh no. And we've certainly had people talk about Vile and Corrupted, which are probably the first 2 that come to mind, which might be your choice as well. But if there's anything else beside those, I'm interested as well.
So I don't even hate Vile.
Great. Talk about that.
Vile is fine. I mean, I haven't had a lot of Vile creatures yet. I just had one Vile Alluvian in a sealed tournament, and it performed great. It was amazing. And I can see it being decent if you combine it with those Hydras or other creatures that trigger off of dying. Corrupt isn't that good either, but I feel like Corrupt is necessary. Especially in the first set, because I don't know why they created Corrupt. Maybe it was to keep certain Necrim decks in check. Maybe it wasn't. We will probably never know. But some Necrim cards being just a cut above the rest, that can be fixed with, a few creatures that hurt you.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, this doesn't always work out because you're never forced to play the Corrupt creatures. You might not even have one in your deck. But I feel like that's also not too bad. Now, what modifiers do I really hate? I feel like every modifier has a place. Maybe Volcanic.
Volcanic, yeah.
But even Volcanic is good in one deck. I have a Volcanic Glider, and its power can't go below 1. So potentially, due to its ability, it's still like a 10-5 or something in Cycle 1. Everything has a place.
Yeah, or could be good if you had this, that, or the other in that half deck, or were able to find components in the other. Even Vile, you've got me thinking if you had the other half or synergy that was generating a lot of minions, then, you're just like trading stats.
Okay, I've got one. Hematophagic.
Yes.
It's a bit like Vile, but payoff is just so tiny when you compare it to Vampiric, for example. So unless it's on a poltergeist or something that wants to sacrifice one of your creatures, I really dislike Hematophagic.
Yeah, Indomitable Fiend's the only one that I found acceptable with Hematophagic, as long as you're on Forge. What about your favorite artwork? Do you like the art of the game? Or you said that was a big part of the original SolForge for you. Is that sort of carried on with SolForge Fusion?
Yes, I do like the artwork, but this is also my biggest point of criticism for the creation of the game. I understand why they did artworks the way they did them, because you don't want to have 3 different artworks for your physical cards, so people fumble with them and don't really know what to upgrade. It just drags out the game. I can see that. And also from an economic standpoint, we can just recycle all of the old SolForge artworks and have 3 times as many of them, if not more. For example, if you take a look at that Palladium Simulacrum and the other new alloying creature that enters with armor, depending on how many exalts on the game, that's just a zoomed in version.
Mm-hmm.
Did you really think we wouldn't notice Stormblade? Well, it's not bad. It's fine. But the thing is, I know 5 people from the top of my head who would have given this game a chance if they had the original artworks, if artworks were still upgrading. Some of the artworks are off-putting to players, especially the ones that are familiar with other trading card games that have much bigger budgets, renowned artists drawing cards for every new set, so they have really high standards. And if they kept the original way of the upgrading cards, I think that would catch a crowd. However, I can see why they didn't do it. So yeah, all in all, the artworks are fine, but also nothing special. Because as you've mentioned before, why? Why is the specimen depicted that way?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The scientist is in the focus of the picture, and there's just this gorilla thing in the background. Is this a beast? Is this a scientist? Why does it look that way? So some of the arts don't really make a lot of sense, but Stormblade has caught onto this. Because if you look into the new campaign and you fight the specimen, they now no longer focus in on the scientist in the front. So we are seeing improvements here.
Terrific. And just to wrap up this section, what about your favorite Forgeborn and why that's your favorite Forgeborn out of the options we have available through set 1 to 3?
All of the Forgeborn have their own attributes which you could like about them. There isn't a single one I hate. Especially if you just look at the mechanics. So I feel like the one that's designed the best, in my opinion, are probably Oros and Steel Rosetta, though I do not play them that much. I think the one that resonates the most with me is Cersei because, well, just having unconditional removal as your Forgeborn ability, which you can use whenever you want, that's simple and it's strong, and that's what I like.
Yeah.
Though I do hope we see a return of Varna. He was a Forgeborn in the original SolForge, and he was great fun. He was very good at reanimating creatures.
Well, it sounds like they like reanimating creatures. I wouldn't be surprised to see him back. Let's move on to our final segment, which is Your Future Together. So where do you see you and SolForge in 2 to 5 years' time? How are we growing the scene in Europe? And are you optimistic about the growth in European players over time?
I hope I will be playing the game in 2 to 5 years, and I hope Stormblade Entertainment will be supporting the game in 2 to 5 years. Playing the game in Europe, I haven't played much in person. I've played with my fiance at home, and I've brought some cards to the store a few times and played with people there. Some of them liked it, some didn't, but I haven't attempted to build a play group here or a competitive scene because, well, we're not just there yet. It doesn't work. There's too few people interested. I don't really know whether that will be a thing in the future. There are a few game stores in Berlin that have ordered SolForge, the alpha. I don't think any store sold their stock completely, and nobody got White Fang Pass. And the last winter, you cannot even pre-order at the biggest distributor here, Blackfire EU. You can't even pre-order that, even if you wanted to. So I don't know whether this game has a future here. However, as of current, we aren't really depending on the local game stores either. There are a few players in Germany. I wouldn't know how many. I can't even estimate it because I believe a lot of them are not even on the Discord. They're just playing in the safety of their homes. And we don't rely on local game stores right now. We order product from the US or find other ways to get cards. It does take some dedication to play this game here. For example, when I pre-ordered the alpha set, it arrived half a year late. It was delayed by quite a bit because they couldn't figure out how to print these things here. And yeah, it was delayed and killed a lot of the hype. And I don't know whether we'll get there again, that people are actually excited for the release of this game. But I will be playing regardless. I'm fine with just playing digitally. That's okay.
Yeah, and like we're finding here in Australia that we've got a group of players that's starting to emerge, but convincing them to come and play in the store is a little bit more challenging than just getting them to play online from their homes when you have that option of two different ways to play. So that'll be interesting to see how that plays out as well. When you could, in theory, have a local community, but if people are more comfortable playing from home on the app, or they've got families and it's harder to get out, the digital may win ultimately in that regard. We'll see. Just before we finish up, are there any shout outs or either people or places? It'd be good to plug your game store again as well, but anybody else you'd like, and members of the community you'd like to shout out?
Shout out to all the SolForge players, Jet, Carly, Paul. I don't even recall half of you, but you're all amazing people, and I'm always looking forward to events that are hosted at a time when I can actually participate. Like tomorrow. Shout out to Brettspielplatz. If just one of you hears this, I'm very happy. Shout out to Stefan, the most active German player. And shout out to my fiance. You're probably asleep by the time this drops, because this is a later section of the podcast, but yeah. Rest well.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for all that. And then we've just got one other segment that we do, and you're familiar with it as well, where we do the secret word. And for anyone who's listening, this is your first episode, maybe. We tend to hide a secret word chosen by my guest in each episode. And if you DM me that, you go into the draw to win a digital SolForge Fusion deck. So have you had any thought, Peter, about what you'd like the secret code to be for your episode?
I haven't had until we started the episode. But you mentioning the word curiosity, I think that's a good word. I
think that defines you and defines you as a gamer and a player. So that's perfect. If you've enjoyed this episode, there are some other great podcasts you can listen to. Charge Plated Podcast, The Fifth Cycle, and Onk Gaming. Ben has recently restarted his meta site that Peter mentioned, and I've really been enjoying that as well. So you can find that on YouTube. And I highly recommend you join our SolForge community on Discord. That's in the show notes. And join the events. We'd love to play with you, and we're very friendly to new players. So, Peter, that's it for this episode. Thank you so much for coming on, talking about your history, giving us a European perspective on the game. I really appreciate everything you've said and all the effort you've gone into to sort of explain your perspective on the game.
Thank you for having me. It's been an honor.
Thank you for listening to the Soulbind podcast. And if you're interested in helping us continue to grow the SolForge Fusion community, you can visit the link in our show notes for our Patreon.